G'day you mob, Pete here from Aussie English. Welcome to this video and podcast. Today it is an interview episode where I'm going to be sitting down with my mate Ross McGibbon, who is a firefighter and incredibly talented wildlife photographer from WA, Western Australia. So today we have a yarn about all kinds of different things regarding photographing Australians' most venomous snakes, as well as whether or not they really are the world's top 9 or 10 most dangerous and deadly snakes. So I think it really depends on how you define that, and we kind of go through that and break that down for you in this interview. We also talk about Ross's calendar that he's releasing for 2021 that is a fundraising calendar. Now, he's going to be raising money for the Global Snakebite Initiative, as well as the RFDS, the Royal Flying Doctor Service of Australia. So both of these organisations are crucial in saving the lives of people who have been bitten by snakes. So a large portion of sales from the fundraising calendar is going to go towards helping these groups, and he is running a competition giving away 3 of these calendars to 3 lucky listeners, viewers, whoever you guys are, wherever you see this. So if you're interested in entering the competition, all you're going to need to do is go down into the description and click the link, or if you're listening to the podcast, go to the podcast page and you will see a link there, and you'll just need to follow the instructions to enter. Good luck. Anyway, without any further ado, guys, smack the bird and let's get into it. Anyway, dude, let's just get into it. Ross McGibbon, welcome to the podcast. Second time.
Pete, thanks for having me. It's good to be back for round 2.
Man, my pleasure. So what have you been up to in the meantime? I had you on probably, a year and a half ago, talking about what you do. So tell us a bit about yourself and what you've been up to.
Well, I guess you could class me as a herpetological photographer, and anyone who doesn't understand that term, it just means reptiles.
It's not medical. It's not medical.
It's not medical. It just means reptiles and amphibians. So that's what I specialise in. I guess I class myself as a wildlife photographer, but I mainly specialise in reptiles. So it's my niche.
To sort of pause you there, it always seemed to me like a really stupid term, herpetology, to mean lizards and frogs or amphibians, but it doesn't include birds, which are technically inside of reptilia, right? Reptiles and crocodiles as well. I don't know, crocodiles probably count. I guess they're reptiles, they're in there as well, but birds are more closely related to lizards and snakes than they are to crocodiles, I think, or it might be the other way around, but I know it's a bit weird.
You might be talking about dinosaurs there, where, there was a big sort of, truth bomb dropped on the world some years ago about, everyone thought that, reptiles were the closest living descendants of dinosaurs, obviously because they look a lot similar and look like they haven't evolved that much. So everyone was thinking, big claim to fame, reptiles are the closest living thing to dinosaurs, and actually birds are a lot closer. So, well,
they are. They're descended from them directly. So it's pretty crazy, right? You would have had thousands and thousands of dinosaur species only 65 million years ago. The asteroid hits and they just go through a massive bottleneck where all these species die, and we literally have a single species that survived and became diversified into birds that are modern birds. Yeah,
crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, what have you been up to in the meantime? How have you been surviving lockdown and COVID in WA? You probably escaped the brunt of it, right?
Well, yeah, like I got away since I spoke to you last year, one of the major trips I did was Arizona. So I got over to Arizona photographing rattlesnakes and Gila monsters, and, which are, one of the, there used to be only 2 venomous lizards, and one was the Gila monster, and it was very famous because of that. And now that with all the research coming out, they're starting to find that Komodo dragons are venomous, and
I think all goannas now technically.
Technically, that but they're still arguing what defines venom, and I don't really try and get involved in in the arguments and the science too much. I just sort of wait for it to filter down to us, reptile enthusiasts, and then I sort of make my assumptions from there based on what's actually proven and what's just hearsay, So
how was the trip to the US? Was that your first time going to the US?
Not first time going to the US, but first time actually going over there to photograph reptiles, which was really cool. And I was going over with a mate who's been to Arizona and to the US to photograph probably 3 times before, so he kind of knew it very well, and it was awesome just to get someone familiar with all the spots, and we just got out there and went hard for about a week straight, and yeah, then went on to Vegas.
I've heard it's crazy over there. I was watching the Joe Rogan podcast, and I'm not sure. I think there was an Australian guy. Yeah, it would have been an Australian guy who was getting interviewed, and he was like, everyone gives Australia a hard time about the snakes and everything. And he's like, man, I lived there and I've seen 2 in my life. And then he's like, but the moment I step off the plane in America and I go to Arizona, I've seen 33 rattlesnakes in the period of 2 weeks. And he's just like, this place is screwed up. There's more snakes than you can shake a stick at. And you guys are terrified of Australia. So how was it trying to find rattlesnakes?
Oh, it was actually super hot when we went. So the perfect times for us were like early morning, late afternoon, and then at night time. So fortunately, through the warmer months, their snakes are more active, but they're more active at night, which, not a lot of people are out and about walking around the Arizona desert at night. But we were.
You're Breaking Bad, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Making blue meth.
Yeah, doing something sketchy. So, mate, it was amazing. We really cleaned up over there. A lot of the species list that we were after we found, and I wrote a really cool article about it, which is just been released in the Australian Herpetological Society's publication called the Red Belly Courier. I don't know if a lot of your audience probably wouldn't know that publication, but it's an annual thing that the reptile community gets behind every year, and it's kind of like what everyone's been doing, and it's full of great articles. So I'll give that a little bit of a plug if there's anyone out there into reptiles. Look up that publication.
Well, you've nailed it, right? You've, with your photography skills, becoming more and more, I think, renowned in Australia, at least with herpetological species. You've been on quite a few magazine front covers and book front covers. You've been really crushing it recently, haven't you?
Yeah. A lot of publications likes to use me for free photos. So yeah.
We can talk more about that later on.
Yeah. No, it is one of those things that I'm glad I have a day job as a firefighter, because it's not really something you can make a living out of, just because it is such a specialised and such a niche market. But it's always humbling to me when anyone buys a print or wants to see my work in a magazine or something like that. So a lot of it I just do for free and just get it out there.
They are incredible shots, though. I mean, you guys hopefully have seen Ross's work from the last podcast that we did, and hopefully you went and checked out his website and photos and products and everything. But what goes into nailing a photo of a reptile, especially a very venomous reptile that is potentially deadly?
Well, first thing you got to do is go out and find it. So I don't photograph any captive stuff, or I do a lot of snake catching on the side as well, relocating snakes from people's homes. But I'm a bit of a purist in my photography, and it means a lot more to me to go out there and find the animal in the wild and photograph the wild species that I have put so much effort into finding. So, that starts off with researching the animal, figuring out its habits, knowing as much as I can about it, going out to the wild, wherever that is in Australia, and then tracking that species down and hopefully taking a good shot of it before it disappears.
It's sort of like bow hunting versus using a rifle, right? You got to really go out there, creep up on the animal. It requires a heap of skills rather than just see it, point and shoot.
Yeah, usually, snakes and reptiles are so cryptic, and that's why you were saying before that your mate, only saw 2 snakes while he was living here. And that's because they survive by being hidden and secretive. So, I either have to find them at night time where they're crossing a road or something like that by driving up and down a road, or I have to get out there on foot. And, unless you really know what you're doing and what you're looking for, it's pretty hard to find snakes on foot. But yeah.
Well, that's what I was wondering, because you always seem to come up with the, you come up with the good stuff when you go on these trips. But do people seem to appreciate just how many hours of driving or walking or hiking or searching have actually gone into the probably, several minutes that you might have with this, beautiful, really rare to see animal in front of the camera, and you've got to sort of make it all work because we only ever see the final product, right?
Exactly. You only ever see my successful hunts where, all the unsuccessful photos, they get deleted and they never see social media. And, all the times where I've gone for a species and targeted that particular species, then not found it, you guys don't get to see. So yeah, you guys just get to see the good stuff. So I try and keep that coming and
seems like 100% hit rate, right? It's like, oh, Ross went out again and nailed it. And you're just like, yeah, that was actually the 10th trip this week or to try and find this snake.
Exactly. Like only earlier this year, I found a desert death adder, which is one of our 9 species of death adder in Australia. And it was the last one I had to find sort of to tick off all of those species. But it took me about 13 tries, for whatever reason, like, the times you go to the right habitat and it would be the wrong time of year, or it would be just a cold patch of weather where they weren't active, or sometimes it would be perfect weather and perfect conditions, perfect habitat, and for some reason they just weren't moving that night. So, it's pretty soul destroying when you drive halfway across the country. I think the most I drove to find it was into Alice Springs and around the West MacDonnell Ranges.
Yep. And
got there and a bushfire had gone through there 2 weeks prior and just leveled the place and nothing was active. And it was just really, really heartbreaking when you look forward to that trip all year and then you get there and it's the habitat's destroyed or something like that. So.
Well, did that take place like whilst you were driving out there, or that was like a recent thing that you just obviously had no way of knowing about?
Just a recent thing that went through. It was probably 2 weeks prior to me getting there. It had ripped through there and nothing was still burning. So, it had sort of finished 2 weeks before I got there, but yeah, everything was charcoal. So, everything was probably hiding or underground or, just deciding to bunker down and wait for things to get better,
Far out. And so what goes into planning a trip like that though? So say that you want to get this perfect shot of a death adder. Mm-hmm. How does one go about getting themselves to the end product of being in front of the death adder, taking a beautiful shot of it? Like how much is behind the scenes there?
Well, some of it, a lot of it is pre-planning and knowing what you're going for and where you're going and everything. So I've got to do a lot of research, A, about the species, but B, just on Google Maps and locations. So I'm speaking to other people that have found them before, and I'm doing as much research as I can so that when I go out there, I haven't driven, my average 6-week trip, I'll probably do about 17,000 Ks.
That's like halfway around Australia. It's the circumference of Australia, yeah. Yeah,
it's pretty full on. So, doing that amount of distance and using all my annual leave for a trip like that, it's a big investment. So yeah. I need to make sure that when I do go out and embark on those trips, I'm going with as much information and as much location details as possible. And then when I get out there, it's really a matter, you're at the mercy of the conditions. So if the weather swings on you and it gets too cold and you're after a nocturnal species, then you've got very little chance of finding it if it's a cold night and you're looking for a snake that's active at night. And
are you normally targeting multiple ones just to sort of hedge your bets and hope that, okay, if I miss one, at least I've got some other ones up my sleeve that hopefully will be there?
Yeah, like I'll go, if I plan a 6-week trip, I'll have a list of like 50 species or something that I'm trying to find, or 30 species, and basically you've got your main targets at the top, and they're what you're basing your trip around. So if I need to drive to Darwin for a really rare species of snake, which I have done in the past, I'll be going for that snake, and then everything else for those 4 days that I'm looking for that species is a bonus.
Man, this is starting to sound more and more like the Pokemon video game. Were you into that as a kid? I don't know if I've asked you that before.
No, but you're not the first person to make that sort of correlation. And I've actually been out. I got quite, I don't know what the right word to use. Not offended, but it was just like a really weird experience when I was up in Darwin and I was looking for frillneck lizards in a park, and some weirdo came up to me and asked me if I was there for the Pokemon.
Oh, Pokemon Go. Yeah,
Pokemon Go. Where people were actually going to real locations and then trying to find virtual Pokemons. And I was like, no, you idiot. I'm actually looking for a real animal in in the wild, and he was like, I was like, oh, cool, man, you know.
This is Pokemon Go in real life, yo.
Yeah, I'm like, and then I thought about it, and I'm just like, this is what people could be doing with their time. They could actually be out there looking for real animals, photographing, you know, things that are right there in front of them that they would get a way better experience from, and here they are doing it virtually on their phone.
It's easier.
It's really weird. It was weird to me anyway, man. It was weird.
Yeah, I loved it. I always grew up on Pokemon. I was there when it first came out. I was just like, oh man, I don't know what it was, but I think that the fact that I'd had two parents as biologists, we used to go down to the beach or into the bush and be lifting stuff up, looking for animals and critters and all sorts of stuff, putting them in containers and taking them home. And I just loved Pokemon. But I had that sort of realization when I picked up bird photography, and I was like, this just feels like I'm playing Pokemon, but I'm not catching them or making them fight, right? Like I'm literally going out with a specific target, trying to get a good photo. And I'm like, you know, it's like you get home, you go through it and you're like, yeah, I've got one.
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities, but, you know, you can do the real thing. So I encourage people to actually take more of an interest in wildlife instead of virtual games.
Well, and what are the things that people don't understand about the differences between, say, bird photography or taking photos of their close relatives, snakes? Because I imagine there's a completely different skill set.
Well, there's probably a lot of similarities, and I don't really get too much into bird photography myself. I think that you got to have a passion for what you're doing. And for me, I'm a hands-on guy, and I like to get, up close and personal with the stuff that I find, and bird photography is great in a way that you can go out in the wild, you can really appreciate nature, you can settle into one spot and wait for birds to come and fly into your zone.
Yeah.
And then you can take photos, and there's no hands-on, there's no interfering with the wildlife, nothing like that. Whereas, for me, I grew up catching snakes and lizards, and I'm fascinated by them, so I like to get hands-on. So if there's a tiger snake over there, I'll go and catch it, and and then I'll photograph it, or the other way around, because a lot of people don't really understand that with reptile photography, if you try and take photos of snakes, you're probably just going to get a bit of body in the long grass. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, to actually get a photo of that snake, you've generally got to catch the animal and then put it into some short grass, so then you can take some photos of it. You know what I mean? Or get it to sort of sit there and realize that you're not a threat. And then that's where, snake handling and stuff comes into it. But obviously I don't advise the general public to do any of that. I'm a
take the photos of them in the grass. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just from a distance with a bird photography lens.
With a bird photography lens. That's how the general public probably needs to interact with snakes. But for me, I'm a professional snake handler. I do this. I've done this my whole life. I do it professionally as well as, for my own passion. So if there was no Facebook, if no one ever saw my photos, I'd still do it because I love it,
When people probably don't realize you're using a rather wide angle lens. And so the photos appear to be, it should have a little thing of like, subject is actually much closer to the camera than may appear at the bottom, right?
Yep. Well, I do. I specialize in wide angle photography. So I'm sometimes inches from the animal itself. And that takes a certain amount of understanding what you're doing so that you're not putting yourself in harm's way unnecessarily, especially with venomous species. But my style of photography is basically wide angle, so I can get all the habitat in the background, because I really like to tell that story of where the snake comes from as well. So you'll find that if anyone checks out my photos, you'll get a beautiful landscape photo with basically an animal in it, and that's the formula I sort of stick with.
I think that's one of the things people don't really respect about good photography until they start becoming photographers themselves, is just that you often have a subject in the photo, but then there'll be all of the broader context, which is sort of really subtle, but without that, it's kind of it wouldn't be the same photo, right? And so quite often you have these beautiful photos of, say, goannas on branches coming towards the camera, but you can also see, the sand and the dunes behind them, the sky, the clouds, everything like that. And you nail the flash. I always see, like, you have the wildlife flash going forward with the bright sun and sky usually in the back. So it looks like there is so much work that goes into getting those photos. Do you have to worry too much about the I guess you would say ethics of manipulating or sort of holding the animal back from doing its thing when you're posing it or getting it, ready for a photo? What are your sort of constraints there?
When it comes to ethics, I think as long as you're not affecting the animal's survivability and you're not putting it under too much undue stress. Like if I go and catch a lizard, for that first brief moment, the lizard's going to think, "Oh, a predator has me,"
Yep.
And there are a lot of purists out there that would be like, "No, completely hands off." If you interfere with the wildlife, then they just lose their mind at the thought of that sort of thing. But they don't understand that for reptile photography to actually come into the world and for me to educate people about them and show people these animals, most of the time you have to catch the lizard, otherwise it's disappeared. Like I always try and photograph in situ if I can, but it's very rarely what actually happens out there in the wild. Like if you see a snake in long grass, you've got seconds before it notices you and disappears. You know what I mean? So if there were no people like me out there doing reptile photography and actually catching and positioning the animal for a photograph, there would be no reptile photos in a book that you could look at and go, "Oh, that's what that animal looks like." So
when here's what the animal looks like from behind when it's running away.
Exactly. So if people want a blurry photo of a lizard disappearing, or a picture of 2 inches of snake in long grass where they can't tell what it is, then that's what happens if you have that purist mindset of, "I'm not going to interfere with the animal."
So it is a trade-off.
It's a trade-off. So what you need to do in my position is get very good at learning the animal's behavior, knowing how to interact with it, how to handle it gently. And then I find that my subjects calm down very quickly when they realize that I'm actually not there to harm them. They get over that, if you catch a snake by the tail, it's going to flip out for a bit. And then if you do the right thing and you handle it correctly and gently and slowly, and you're moving slowly with the animal, they do tend to go, "Oh, hang on a minute, I'm not getting eaten, I'm not getting attacked by a predator, it's not harming me," and they do calm down. And I've had a lot of reptiles get curious at me then. And then I've also had a lot just want to keep getting away. So
but I imagine too, if you lower your profile and you're lying down quite a lot for these photos, they're going to feel a lot less threatened because you're not this big ass, shadow thing in front of them. Correct.
So a lot of people don't realize that reptiles see us as large predators. So when I take my photos, I'm doing it for 2 reasons. I'm down on the ground, laying on my stomach, mostly to get the right perspective, because when humans walk around and observe the world from, a 6 foot high, depending on how tall you are,
5'9",
exactly. That perspective, you're used to looking down on small animals. So if I just walk up to an animal and I'm standing and I take a photo of a reptile, you're going to see what you would see if you just came across it. And that perspective isn't new and it's not different to anyone. Whereas if you get down on their level, you'll see that if you look at any of my photos, it's like I'm staring right into that animal's, soul from its level. So it would be like if you were another snake coming across a snake and it rears up in front of you, that's what you're going to see when you look.
I feel like a lot of them, especially the snakes, like the one over your left shoulder there, those photos where the snake is kind of sprung up and looks like it's about to strike. Yep. I feel like that must be the last thing billions of Australian rodents have ever seen.
Yeah. And it's also the last thing any human wants to see in real life as well. So, but if I can give them that perspective from a safe point of view, like I get a lot of people on my social media going, I'm glad it's you and not me. And secretly I'm going, yeah, me too. I'd rather be doing this in the wild than looking at it on social media. But for a lot of people, they don't have that option. So
that's always been my thing, man. I'm sort of like, I'll photograph pretty much everything, but fuck snakes and sharks. Like that can be someone else's job. Crocodiles too. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, exactly. But then you get people that are really passionate and they understand the animals,
exactly
that, to a level that the public don't understand. And then I can get so close to these animals because of the knowledge, the intimate knowledge I have about their behavior. So when you know what you're doing, your fear level and if you have understanding about the animal, your fear level drops. And a lot of people ask me, "Oh, aren't you terrified or aren't you scared?" And I'm like, I don't get scared when I'm photographing venomous snakes, because I know what I'm doing. I understand the animal, and there's really a lot less to fear than what the general public perceive venomous snakes to be like. And
we'll get into that in a bit. But before we switch up gears, have you noticed much in terms of the personality of these different species? I mean, it could be lizards, snakes, or goannas that you've been out there photographing. Have you noticed that there is a wide range of different ways that they'll react to you when you're trying to photograph them?
Yeah, that probably depends on the situation, but probably what we could talk about there is temperaments, individual temperaments within the same species. So I could go out and I could go and catch 10 brown snakes, and generally speaking, they have a temperament, and they're quite nervous snakes, and they can get quite defensive. But you'll find within those 10 individuals that I've caught and photographed, they'll act in 10 different ways.
No kidding.
So a lot of people don't understand. They'll be like, "Oh, all snakes are aggressive and all snakes are this." And it's like, no, the species as a whole might have traits that are represented throughout all the individuals, but then each one has an individual temperament. And I try and liken that to a dog. You know what I mean? You can go and pat 10 Labradors and you'll probably get, Labradors in general, yes, they are a pretty kind family dog, but due to each, for whatever reasons, that animal will have its own temperament, and snakes and wildlife are the same.
Well, I guess it's an evolutionary thing too, where you probably need a wide range of behaviors, like innate ones, just in case the environment changes. If all of a sudden you have a drought with a great paucity of food, a lot less food than normal, you need things that are going to be risk averse and more going after it, right, as opposed to shy and calm. So I guess that's why those things are sort of maintained in the population. But do you want to switch then onto your documentary and tell us about what made you decide to make that and what it's about?
That is kind of like a project that's been on my mind for, I would say, over 5 years. And it was just, it comes from my initial start on social media and educating the public came from a snake catching background, where we would go out to the jobs and then we would get the client to film us catching the snake. And then out of that footage, we would put an educational video up and really try and spread snake education and awareness, because you get sick of going to jobs where people are losing their minds, they don't understand the animal, and you're just like, man, if you knew some of what I know as a professional, you could be so much calmer in this. It wouldn't affect your life. You wouldn't be losing sleep over it. You wouldn't be paranoid about snakes in the backyard. Like, fear can be greatly, greatly reduced with understanding. So that's where we would use our material to then educate the public. And that's what kicked that off. And, I just basically have gotten to a point in my life where I was like, if I just need half an hour using all the material I've got, I sat down and I wrote, it was something like over 7,000 words or something. So I produced it, narrated it, and released it on all my social medias. And basically, in a nutshell, it's just half an hour of what every Australian needs to know, just to understand snakes better, and then reduce their fear levels. So I cover things like snake behavior, some really interesting footage in there. I cover things like what you need to do when you encounter a snake, and really just bring a higher level of understanding to the public in just a half an hour documentary. So
what do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions that, whether people are from overseas or Australian, tend to have when it comes to snakes?
Well, one of the biggest misconceptions is that snakes are aggressive. So people actually believe that snakes are out to get them. They see if they encounter a snake, they believe that snake sees them and wants to attack them. And I describe this or depict this in the video very clearly, and I say this is what happens when a snake is hunting prey. And you'll see 3 examples where a snake will fly out of its enclosure and attack a prey item because they've picked up the scent, they can see it, and they absolutely go for it with everything they've got.
Yeah.
And they don't do that to humans. So when they defend themselves, they perceive us as a large predator, and all they're doing is they're in defense mode. And this happens instinctually, that they're programmed from, you could get a snake that's newborn and it'll come out of its egg. 2 days later, if it encounters something larger than that, it'll just rear up and start doing this behavior because it's instinctive and it's indoctrinated into its DNA to be able to do that behavior. So when we come across a snake, we're many times larger than these animals. They perceive us as a predator, and they can become defensive. So what I try and do in the documentary is differentiate what is defensive behavior and what is aggressive behavior, and really show the public what is the difference, and that snakes are not aggressive towards us, they're defensive.
And they almost always are trying to get away unless there is zero chance of them being able to escape, right? And that's when you're in your most vulnerable position as a human with a snake. If you stepped on it or you've cornered it and it's got no other option but to defend itself, that's the no-go zone.
And getting back to how cryptic these animals are, especially snakes, if they're out in the open, they're vulnerable to predators. So an eagle can swoop down and grab them, a kookaburra, a big goanna can spot them from a mile off, run over and grab them. So they survive by being hidden. And a lot of people don't realize that when they disturb a snake, its first reaction is to disappear. And more often than not, you're not even going to see it. So they don't understand how many times they're walking through their backyard, long grass, a bush, and they walk past a snake and it just disappears. And I give examples of that in the documentary. Where the stories and a lot of the hype comes about is when they see a defensive snake, people come up with all these ways to rationalize it and figure out what it is, what that behavior is. And when they see a snake acting defensively, in the snake's mind, it's defending its personal safety. So it sees us as a large predator. It's doing all these behaviors to warn you off, to scare you away, so that you'll leave it alone. And biting is usually a last resort because...
Well, you've shown that in the video. Sorry to interrupt you, but you've shown that in your videos. You'll see you coming towards the snake, and the snake will sort of turn and sort of try and make itself look larger, rear its head up. But the moment you stop, it'll be like, all right, time to bail. And then if you walk towards it again, it'll be like, okay, defend myself. But it stops there quite often. And I imagine that the only way for you to really get it to bite you would be to step on it or to grab it with your bare hand or something, right?
Pretty much. Like generally, like I said, it's the snake has all these behaviors available to it, like rearing up, flattening its neck out. They'll mock strike, and they'll put on a bit of a show basically to warn off a perceived predator. Biting for it is the last resort, because if it does bite, if it's a venomous snake, it's potentially wasting its venom. Bingo. And B, it's coming into contact with a predator. So that would be like, you'd see these two guys out at the pub, they're shaping up to each other. One of them sort of, puffs his chest up and goes like that to the other one, and he gets scared and runs away. Their last resort is to actually come into contact with each other when it comes to wild animals, because all they're doing is risking breaking a fang, getting attacked themselves. So they're thinking, if I can just put on this big show and I can warn that predator off, and they do it instinctively. There's not a lot of thought that happens behind this. It's just instinctive behavior that they do. So if I can get people to understand that the biting is not an intentional, I'm going to get you and bite you type scenario, then that's at least helping to overcome some of that negative stigma that snakes have.
Definitely. And it's funny, I was looking at some documentaries recently on venomous animals, and I think may have been spiders or scorpions, but if they unload, I think it was scorpions, they were sort of trying to get them to unload their venom, and they were saying, and then like working out how long does it take for them to produce that venom again. Mm-hmm. And some of them, it took days before they had the venom back to be able to go out and then hunt and feed themselves after they defended themselves against the predator. So they quite often there's no real incentive aside from saving their life to wasting their venom on you, because it takes a lot of energy, which if you're a snake, right, is something that's on high demand, low supply.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's a resource like anything else, and the body needs to build that resource up. So if it uses it unnecessarily while trying to defend itself, and here's a great point as well. when a venomous snake bites to defend itself, it's biting because it really believes it has no other option. When it bites, they don't always inject venom. And if you look at the snake that is accountable for the most deaths in Australia, the eastern brown snake, they only envenom people 60 to 80%. Sorry, they dry bite 60 to 80% of the time.
Yeah.
So out of 10 times of biting out of defense, you'll probably get 6 to 8 of those will be dry bites. And that's because the snake, it's becoming widely believed by the scientific community that the snakes know when to use their venom and when not to use their venom. So if a snake is biting a prey item, 100% that snake latches on, it bites down hard, the venom comes from the venom ducts through the fangs and into the prey item. And that's going to happen 100% of the time. If they're biting to defend themselves from, it's usually just a quick get away from me bite. They don't latch on. They're not chewing. You know, some species, you know, do tend to hang on and chew, but generally speaking, when snakes bite out of defense, it's a quick get away from me bite. When venom is then inducted into the person, it's usually because the snake is just venomous and they bit you. It's not the snake intentionally wants to inject venom into you. So dry biting is something that happens a lot, and it doesn't happen a lot when they're hunting prey. So it just immediately tells us that when they're defending themselves, they're not trying to use their venom. It's just a byproduct of them having venom.
It's interesting. I guess it's like them having a gun, right, with blank bullets and loaded bullets, and they can kind of decide when they want to use one or the other. And they know, obviously, don't use blanks on prey that I'm actually trying to kill and consume. But if I have a human that's here and I want to scare them away, there's no real point in me using a bullet if a blank will do it, right?
Yeah, that's a great correlation. So, hopefully people can sort of understand that it's not their intention to use venom. Because even if they inject you with venom, you're not going to die quick enough. Like you could go get a shovel, come back, kill the snake, and that venom isn't going to work quick enough to stop you from killing it.
Yeah.
And I show a really cool scene. I lifted a bit of footage from the BBC for this, where off YouTube, but it demonstrates that point where a goanna, a big parenti, is walking through the desert. It comes across a mulga snake, big, plus 2 meter mulga snake, and it attacks it. And if that snake bites that goanna, the venom isn't going to work fast enough to stop the goanna from killing it. So venom isn't really used in defense in Australian snakes. Different if you're in Africa and you see the spitting cobras, where they'll actually, they've got holes in the front of their fangs so that they can actually spit and spray venom into the eyes of large predators. That's when venom is used in defense. But in Australian snakes, they don't bite and use venom to defend themselves. Biting is purely for acquiring prey and for digestive reasons as well. Because
I wonder how much that's to do with the environment, especially the arid environment, just being so, requiring a lot of hunting to get any kind of prey, because it's just it's very unproductive in terms of the amount of animals that live there. And so snakes have to be so efficient, right? But if you go to somewhere where I imagine spitting cobras are from, it's probably going to be somewhere tropical where they have a lot of water, a lot of prey, and they can just keep making venom again and again, because you would think evolutionarily there's going to be a significant selection pressure against snakes in Australia to waste any kind of energy, any kind of venom, any kind of, having dumb behaviors where they're just wasting on defending themselves against large predators when a mock bite or just standing up would have done. But
correct.
Man, so what's going on with the calendar that you're doing? Tell us about the fundraising calendar that you've put together this year and the cause that you're raising funds for.
Yeah, so each year around this time of year, I launch my fundraising calendar where I donate 25% of the proceeds to, this year I'm doing the Royal Flying Doctors and the Global Snakebite Initiative, and whereas in previous years I've just done the Royal Flying Doctors, but it's been on my mind for a long time that how lucky we are in Australia. And I'll go back to the story that that I went over briefly with you the first time, and that was when I got bitten by a highly venomous snake. It was a mulga snake, or also known as a king brown. I was 1,000 k's from Perth Hospital out in the outback, and there was a nearby town about 15 minutes away. So I went to the hospital, applied the pressure bandage. Basically, the Royal Flying Doctors are a service that if you need remote medical care, basically a private jet flies out and picks you up from the nearest runway. And this is...
Or road.
Or road. Yeah, basically, or road. So it's an amazing service that we have in Australia, and it's just one that only wealthy countries like Australia are privy to. And then, when I got bitten by that snake and I needed that service, I thought I was, on the flight back, and I was just thinking how lucky we are in Australia to have that. So I wanted to give back. A lot of my fans were like, when are you going to bring out a calendar? Basically, the penny dropped, and I thought what I'll do is a fundraising calendar each year to raise money for the RFDS. Now, in the last 3 years, that calendar's raised $5,000 for the Royal Flying Doctors. But this year, and it's been on my mind for a long time, that other countries aren't as fortunate as Australians. There's somewhere between 80,000 and 140,000 deaths a year from snakebite globally. Yeah. And Australia, you might be surprised to believe that Australia only accounts for 2 of those deaths per year.
Yeah.
So it's a huge global problem, not so much a problem in Australia. And we're so lucky, because we have things like the Royal Flying Doctors that will come out and assist us if we're in dire straits, whereas other countries just aren't that lucky. So the global snakebite initiative helps the snakebite burden on a global basis. And they're doing some really important work. And I thought this year what I want to do is split the proceeds down the middle and support both an Australian cause, which I believe is really important, and a global cause, which is where the global snakebite initiative comes in.
And how are they trying to reduce the numbers of deaths from snake bites? Are there certain products or, what's behind the initiative that's allowing them to reduce those numbers?
Well, it's a multi-layered approach. So they invest, or basically they're a non-for-profit organisation, and where they invest their time and money is education and awareness to start with, so that you can, if you're educating people in poorer countries to simply wear some shoes at nighttime or wear shoes when working in the field, they're going to step on snakes less. They're then trying to get the education of correct snakebite treatment out there, because a lot of these countries have, shamanic healers and faith healers that, let's call a spade, they don't work. But in their culture, that's what they've turned to for so many years. It's very hard to get new education and awareness and new procedures based on actual research, what works and what doesn't. It's very hard to get a culture to change their long-standing beliefs and not go to faith healers.
Yeah.
And actually go to the hospital.
I'd imagine too there'd be a huge amount of these countries just being impoverished. Yep. And then probably really rural. Like I think I was reading, and we'll get to this shortly, about your article. You were saying that there was 50,000 deaths a year in India. I think India accounts for the majority of the largest country with the largest number of snake deaths, right? Snake bite deaths. Yep. And I would imagine, without looking into it, it's because they're farmers, they're in rural communities, they're poor, and they're uneducated and don't necessarily know what to do once they've been bitten by something like a king cobra or something.
Correct. And I want people to see the difference between, if you get bitten in Australia by a snake, it's usually going to be, where you've got access to a phone or mobile reception or help. You can call up an ambulance, they'll come and get you. You can call up the Royal Flying Doctors, they'll fly to anywhere and get you. You'll receive the best medical care when you get to hospitals.
They have the anti-venom on stock.
You've got anti-venom on stock, and if not, they'll fly it to you. It's really first-class medical treatment, which is a big factor why we don't suffer in Australia so much from snakebite. Whereas you think of a poor farmer over in India, he's working out in the field, he's scared to death of snakes. He supports his whole family, and these cultures have large families because everyone needs to work, everyone needs to contribute. Yeah. They're out there in the field. They're not given any gloves or shoes or anything like that. They're just out there doing their best to provide for their family, and they get bitten by a snake. And now over there, a lot of their snakes, this is something we don't really have to worry too much in Australia, but a lot of their ambush predatory snakes over there, they have venoms that destroy tissue and destroy blood cells, and they can really, if they don't kill you, they can really maim you.
Yeah.
So people are like getting half their leg eaten away by snakebite venom, and then they're disabled for the rest of their life. So if they don't die, they're disabled and then they can't work. So it's a multi-level problem overseas. It affects the poorest nations in the world. And it's just something that we're so lucky not to have such a problem with. So the aim in supporting that cause and bringing awareness to that cause is to just be like, hey, we're really lucky in Australia. Let's support the RFDS because they do an amazing job, but let's also support an organisation that's doing something globally about the problem, because it's now registered by the World Health Organization as a neglected tropical disease. And when you stack those figures up to some things like, malaria and all these other things, it's kicking their ass. Snakebite is kicking a lot of the diseases around the world's ass. And the awareness hasn't been brought to it. So, that's part of the reason why I'm trying to do this and just do my small little bit to help that as well.
Yeah, I can't imagine. When I was in Indonesia, we went to Sulawesi and we were climbing up in the mountains there to do, we were collecting animals for museums. So some of them were snakes, but I remember just shitting myself when I was thinking, like, they gave you the warning of, by the way, there's vipers in the jungle that'll just hang down off vines. So don't just grab stuff, and be careful of what you brush up against. And you're just like, Jesus.
You're like, Jesus. At least, if I see a snake in Australia, all I generally have to do is watch where I'm walking. Whereas, over there they've got arboreal vipers, which we don't have in Australia.
Exactly.
And, the way they hunt their prey is to hang off the end of a branch and wait for a bird to fly by or a lizard to walk by, and then they grab that prey item. And imagine if you're in India and you're picking tea, or if you're picking, anything that grows on a tree, and these vipers are actually in that, and you've got your hands in there.
Yeah.
It can be a big problem. So it's just something that we don't have in Australia. And
well, I remember we were in Mamasa, which was this town, effectively central Sulawesi, and when we got to Makassar in the bottom of Sulawesi, it was a 12-hour drive along dirt roads to get to this town, Mamasa. Then we had to go walk and climb up into the mountains for another 2 days. And so my boss, my supervisor at the time, was like, if you get bitten, you're fucked, mate.
Yeah.
Don't get bitten. There's no one's coming.
Yes. Yeah.
It'll only have to be sit down, relax. Is it a dry bite? Okay, you're fine. So...
Yep.
It was wide eye opening. It opened my eyes up wide. But anyway, moving on to the article, mate. So I got you to write an article recently because I'm trying to put together the Aussie English magazine. So spoiler alert for everyone.
That's right. Give it a plug. Get as much info about it as possible.
Yeah, well, I'm working away on a few things, but I guess the thing at the moment is that I want to get a nice, interesting magazine about Australia that's also English learning resources. And so that was why I would love to cover Australian wildlife, history, culture, news and current affairs, stuff like that. And you were one of the first people to come to mind when it came to wildlife, and obviously beautiful photos that would make the magazine look a lot better and hopefully sell better. But I was like, I sat down and thought, how can I harass Ross to, throw me a vine branch? And we came to the idea of talking about Australia's most venomous snakes, right? But whether or not it's a sort of accurate stereotype that gets thrown around, I mean, I'm not sure if it's one of those things that people like the crocodile hunter were ever responsible for. I think it's probably, Americans caught onto our science and then just took it from there. But I got you to write this article. So I've sort of gone through it and put in key questions here to cover it. To start with, why does Australia have so many venomous snakes?
Probably because it's a very, very large continent, and we have just about every habitat type that you can imagine in Australia. So deserts, rainforest, coastal dunes, swamplands, wetlands, like we've got it all. So a country with such a vast array of habitat types, you're going to get a lot of species then taking advantage of those different habitat types. And because we have so much space in Australia, a lot of those species can be isolated to one region because of whatever habitat that they prefer, or geographical boundaries such as mountain ranges or anything like that. So you'll get all these species then taking advantage of those niches and those different prey types. And over time, they become different species. So basically now, after evolution's done its thing in Australia, we have, over 215 species of snakes in Australia. Add another 15 or 20 to that if you want to count subspecies, which are, potentially halfway through that evolutionary process of becoming their own species, and they call that speciating. But basically, Australia has a lot of reptiles and a lot of biodiversity. We have over 1,000 species of reptiles alone, and a lot of those are endemic to Australia. You can only see them in Australia, and that goes for a lot of our other wildlife as well. But there is with a lot of wildlife becomes, a fair bit of negative stigma, and I think that Australian snakes are probably the most vilified out of all that, followed by sharks and crocodiles. But when people latch on to certain pieces of information, if they want to write an article to scare people, or if they want to get more attention, they might hype up the danger of it. So that seems to be what the media has done a lot, and especially with snakes. I see it every single year. Snakes are on the move, and there's more than last year, and they're just fear-mongering every single year, and that sells newspapers and sells stories and gets clickbait for online activity. But what it does, it has a very negative impact on people's fear levels. They believe that these animals are far more dangerous than they really are, and you get people that are paranoid to even enjoy the Australian bush because they've been sitting at home for their whole life hearing about how dangerous our dangerous creatures are, and people that are paranoid to come to Australia because everything wants to kill you in Australia, and it's really not the case. So that the essence of that article was to really sort of dispel some of those myths.
It is funny, isn't it, right, how much we sort of pride ourselves on that kind of trope. But at the same time, if you were to say to someone, put your hand up if you know someone who's been bit by a snake, spider or shark and died,
yes,
you'd be looking around the room for a long time, I think, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas if you said, do you know anyone who's died from heart disease or in a car accident, almost every single person's going to be like, yep.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Or even drowning,
Yeah.
We got 2 people a year dying from snakes in Australia, and we've got around 300 people dying just from drowning. So, you've got parents out there that will absolutely lose their minds if they see a snake in the backyard, but they won't think twice about, taking their kids to a beach or, unsupervising them or not supervising them around a pool or something like that. And I really try and put that into context. There are far many more things out there that are a danger to your health than snakes and our dangerous creatures.
I always find that so interesting, right? Trying to sort of level that up. You don't shit yourself when you get in your car and drive from Geelong to Melbourne or around all of Australia, right? But it's statistically a great deal more dangerous to do that than to probably step by a snake on the ground, right? Yeah. So it is funny how we get those kind of desensitization to one thing and massive sensitization to another thing. I remember watching Bondi Rescue, the TV show about taking care of Bondi Beach outside of Sydney. Yep. And it seems like every single time someone died on that show from drowning, it was a foreigner who had just arrived in Australia, had absolutely no understanding of rips and didn't know how to swim, but just went to the beach, thought it was safe. Yep. And you're like, they willingly do that with no second thought. And yet they crap in themselves about snakes or sharks or, crocodiles, when drowning is obviously all of those animals combined is killing way more people, right?
Yes, exactly. And even when you compare things that are perceived as harmless, like domestic dogs kill an average of the same amount of people a year as snakes do. But you don't get parents freaking out about their kid running up to a strange dog or an unfamiliar dog or anything like that, where dog attacks kill just as many people as snakes do. So
And horses,
So,
right? You put the graph in the article about the
yeah.
animals that are most likely to kill humans. You want to talk
Yep.
about sort of the top contenders there?
Yeah, well, what the top three in Australia aren't what are considered, actually, the top four weren't considered as dangerous animals. You've got everyone coming over here and they can't wait to see a kangaroo. Kangaroos kill, I think they were third on the list, just from memory. You've got horses and ponies at the top, about 77 people in a 10-year period.
Yeah.
Under that, you've got cattle. Under that, you've got kangaroos. Under that, you've got domestic dogs. And then snakes came in at like number 7 down the list. And it really puts into perspective that there are other animals that are more dangerous to you than snakes are. So, and they're not perceived as dangerous. They're the cute and cuddly things. Like, no one really fears dying from a cow, a horse, a kangaroo, or a dog, but they're the actual 4 biggest killers in Australia.
Well, I wonder too with the horses, cows, and kangaroos, how much of that is car accidents versus horses and people falling off of them?
Most of it, with horses, because we ride horses, obviously there's going to be a higher degree of horse-related deaths from actually riding the animal than hitting it in a car. But when it comes to cattle, you've got farmers that are out there mustering, but a lot of those are people that are. Sorry, my feed's still working.
Yep. Yeah. You're good.
I lost it in all of your background. Yeah. So what I'm trying to say is, you've got all these animals that aren't perceived as dangerous, and they're actually killing more people in Australia. A lot of those would be car accidents, though. So people hitting kangaroos, hitting cattle, but then again, you've got people who don't hesitate to go out and drive at night, long distances on rural roads, not even thinking about the dangers. And then you've got people that are paranoid to go into the bush because they might see a snake.
And I guess this is what's so important about the education, right, of
Yep.
people in these situations. So the next question I sort of have here is Australia home to the most deadly snakes in the world, and how is this measured?
When you talk about deadliest and you want to define deadliest, the easiest way to do it is how many deaths are responsible from a certain species. So if we look at the eastern brown snake, which kills the most amount of people in Australia, you're looking at 2 deaths a year, and that's not just attributed to that snake. We might get 1 brown snake death, 1 tiger snake death, something like that. It's about 2 a year. So you can't really say that our snakes are the deadliest, because overseas you've got snakes in India killing 50,000 people. Globally, estimates are as high as 140,000 people a year globally. So you can't say that our snakes are the deadliest if you define deadliest by killing the most amount of people. Where the lines get blurred is there was a test done in 1979 called the LD50 test. And what they did is they got a bunch of Australian snakes, like a lot of the well-known ones. They got a few well-known ones from overseas, like king cobras and mambas and things like that. And they tested the venom on mice because we can't test on humans. So they did it
Unfortunately.
in the lab. Unfortunately, yeah.
You can do it to yourself, I believe. There's definitely YouTube channels I've seen where people envenomate themselves in order to build up immunity, but no, you can't do it wide scale.
Yeah, and I would say to anyone listening to that, don't do that. It's very stupid.
Well, you see, that guy ends up like ruining his life, right? His wife leaves him and his kids are like, this guy's weird. But anyway, so keep going.
Yeah, look, he was probably going to find a way to ruin it anyway. He just decided to do it with snakes. But, to get back to the point being that, actually, where was I, Pete?
LD50. So LD50,
LD50,
I should mention too that stands for lethal dose and at 50%. So you take like 100 mice, and what is the dose of venom that if you gave it to all of those mice, at least half would die?
Yes. What is the minimum amount that if you gave to all those animals, half would at least die? So that's the LD50 test. It was a great way for scientists in an academic setting to just compare venoms against each other using a standardized test subjects, which is mice. But where it falls down is that when the results for that test got publicized, what happens is when there's scientific papers released, if there's anything kind of cool or interesting in scientific papers, then you'll get some news mediums doing articles on it, and that has resulted in a list of, we have the deadliest snakes in the world, or the most venomous snakes in the world, and those terms aren't interchangeable, for one, and I just explain all that in the article. But when you say most venomous, you're comparing those snakes, that venom, to mice. And we don't have the same genetic makeup as a mouse, as most people would understand. So yes, some of these venoms are highly toxic to mice, and yes, some of those snakes are highly toxic to people. But when you start using that list to boast about how dangerous and how venomous Australian snakes are, it's quite inaccurate, and it's really more hype than it is any tangible facts relating to snakebite deaths on humans.
They should probably preface it with, if you're a mouse, Australia is home to 9 of the 10 deadliest snakes in the world, right? But I think you were saying, if you compare the toxicity of the venoms across, snakes, there are 4 big issues, right? The tests are only done on mice. Mice are the preferred prey by many snakes. So obviously their venom is specific to killing mice. They may be able to bite other animals and it may have a completely different effect on them. Correct. It doesn't include 600 of the world's other venomous snakes, and it doesn't take into account venom yield of snakes as well. And then there was one I was thinking, it doesn't take into account propensity of species to fully envenomate, defensively. So although, say, taipans may be one of the, if not the most venomous snake in the world for mice, how do you ever measure that when they bite humans? It's not really a fair comparison, right? Because you've got them defensively biting versus intentionally envenomating a prey object to eat, right?
Well, that's where envenomation rates come in. And, for the eastern brown snake, it's as low as 20 to 40%. Whereas, some other snakes have a lot higher envenomation rates. Like if you take the coastal taipan, it's got a higher envenomation rate, probably about 80% of the time it'll envenom. Because it has longer fangs, it has, potentially a 3 meter long snake. You've got these highly capable snakes with different tools at their availability to bite and envenom. So, that's just one of the many, many, many factors. Then you've got the human factors as well. Like, was that person wearing long pants? Yeah. Which type of snake bit them? How long is the fangs of the snake? What was the situation? Was the person standing on the snake and the snake got to bite multiple times before they remove their foot from the snake? There's so many factors when you're talking about how dangerous a snake is. And what I'm trying to point out here is simply testing a bunch of snakes' venom on mice does not correlate to how dangerous a snake is. There are way too many factors to actually just quantify it. If we were to look at how dangerous certain snakes are, we just probably need to look at what snakes are responsible for the most deaths in Australia, what snakes are encountered the most, and what snakes bite people the most. They're probably the 3 things that you would sort of use to quantify how dangerous a snake is.
One of the things I wanted to mention was that it's funny with the Sydney funnelweb spider, for instance, it is one of the 2 deadly Australian spiders. In fact, I don't know when the last person to die of a redback spider bite was, probably 50 years ago, but funnelwebs kill, 1 person every decade or whatever it is. But the ironic thing is that we're only susceptible to funnelweb venom because of a mutation that primates got in their DNA to do with, I think, sodium channels and stuff inside of their bodies. But if a dog or a cat gets bitten by a funnelweb, nothing happens because they're completely immune to it. So if you were to measure them, or it could be mice as well, if you were to measure them as being the the test animal, you'd be like, oh man, funnelwebs are harmless.
yeah, exactly. Or if you picked their preferred prey, insects, they would be so much more toxic. And because we're testing these snake venoms on mice, and we don't have the same genetic makeup as a mouse, it's very hard to say that, this snake is more venomous than that snake. And really,
it does seem weird that they're using the prey item of the snake. It's like the venom was specifically designed to kill this animal.
Yep. Yes, exactly. Evolution has made sure that venom has evolved specifically to kill the mouse. And then you test toxicity on a bunch of snakes that, generally prey on mice. That's probably a good way to compare snakes that prey on mice. It's probably a good way to compare, but not extrapolate out to, this is how this venom is going to be deadly to humans. So it's just sort of hearsay when it comes to the media getting hold of it and saying, Australia has the 9 out of the 10 top deadliest snakes in the world, or 20 out of the top 25. When you hear that, that test comes from an outdated test performed on mice, and it's only for academics to get a level playing field to test venoms. And when you start saying how dangerous a snake is, it's just hype. So the best thing people can do is learn what highly venomous snakes or dangerously venomous snakes live in their area, and then work out ways to avoid those animals, live cohesively with them. Having a snake catcher's number in your phone, it is one, and a first aid kit, and knowing first aid. They're two things that every Australian can do to greatly minimise the risk of dying from a snake.
And probably their stress.
And their stress as well. So,
because you know what to do. You got a plan, right? You got a plan. If there's a death adder inside your house, don't just freak out and burn the place down. Just call someone. And
it's a reactionary problem. So people kind of, unless they're living in an area where they regularly see snakes and they've either learnt to deal with them, or there's some people out there that believe they need to eliminate them. But unless it's one of those problems for the average Australian, it's just going to surprise them. So if I can sort of get education and awareness out there to, hey, have your local snake catcher in your phone. Even if you see an animal that you think looks like a snake, take a photo if you can, send it to your local snake catcher. He'll identify for you and go, it's a legless lizard. You've got nothing to worry about. We've got over 45 species of legless lizard in Australia, and so many of them get their heads chopped off or cut in half or killed or whatever, because so many people just fear and misunderstand animals that they don't know enough about. So
it is sad to think about all those poor legless lizards. They're just trying to warm up. They're like, I've got no fangs, I've got no venom, I've got no weapons. Don't kill me, bro.
Legless lizards, non-venomous snakes. Only about half of our terrestrial species are venomous. You've then got only about 40 of those species that are dangerously venomous. Then you can dwindle that down to about 10 species that have actually caused a human fatality. So when people hear, Australia has over 200 species of snakes, if they don't know what I've just said, they might be way more petrified of these animals than they really need to be. So education and awareness, it's so important, A, for the conservation of the species, and B, just to help people. So again, that's what these articles that I'm doing and these documentaries that I'm doing are designed to do, is conserve the animals, not take it out on them, and come back to helping people as well.
Well, and they have an important role. I can't remember where I would have learnt it or saw it, but I'd heard about how in certain places where, you're farming, if you take out all the snakes, you can end up with rodent problems. And if you allow snakes to thrive, they're not necessarily a problem for your cattle, your crops, your sheep, your family, but they'll deal with rats and mice on the farm or the property that would otherwise be a significant problem to infrastructure, buildings, your crops, whatever it is. So it's a kind of delicate balance. And if you just freak out, with snakes and try and remove them from the equation, you can actually lead to a great deal more harm to yourself and others indirectly, right? You mentioned in the article an interesting story of tiger snakes originally being the deadly Australian snake that caused the most number of deaths, but then the crown was kind of stolen by the eastern brown, and the interesting relationship there between, I guess, human interruption of the environment, right? Do you want to talk about that and how that happened?
Yeah, so basically it comes down to urbanisation. You've got, when early settlers came to Australia, the ecosystem was intact. And where early settlers first came to, like Victoria and then spreading up through New South Wales. That's prime along the coastal regions there. That's prime habitat for tiger snakes, and there was many snakes to deal with when they first got over here. Once they realised that these animals were dangerous, they feared them. They didn't have this problem to deal with in England. And wherever they came from, Ireland, Scotland, they didn't really have to deal with these problems. They come to Australia and people are dying from snakes. So where they settled was a hotspot basically in tiger snake distribution. So tiger snakes used to account for the most amount of deaths. And then tiger snake anti-venom was invented. So that was the first one because it was obviously killing the most amount of people. It was in the 30s. They made tiger snake anti-venom. Then, if you look at today's, we've got anti-venom for all of our dangerously venomous snakes. So no matter what snake you get bitten by, you go to the hospital, you're going to get given anti-venom that will cover all the snakes. What happened, though, was through urbanisation, we started farming, clearing a lot of the land, and then with humans comes introduced rats and mice. So, obviously they came over on the ships. They were in basically everyone's stuff. Wherever we go, rats and mice go. So you get the brown snake, for example, who thrives on feeding on rats and mice. Their numbers are actually, their populations have done better through to urbanisation than species like tiger snakes, where a lot of tiger snakes, they do eat a range of different prey items, but their main one is frogs. And tiger snakes love wetlands. So when we clear a wetland or we degradate the water, pollute the water, basically the tiger snake numbers went down, brown snake numbers went up, and now we have the brown snake, which is technically more deadly than the tiger snake.
Yeah, it was a really crazy story because I'd never really understood that fact. Like, I know that both of those are very venomous snakes, but that eastern browns and I guess western browns are so synonymous with farming. Right?
Yes,
they just seem to be all over the place. But and the last thing I wanted to ask you about was the death adder. How did it get its name?
Oh yeah, the death adder. So it's an early dramatization of death adder, DEAF, because death adders are a ambush predator. So they're one of the only highly venomous snakes in Australia that will stay dead still, submerged in leaf litter or sand or whatever the substrate is, and they will lie dead still. And when a prey item comes close enough, they've got a really cool lure on their tail, which they
caudal lure, right?
Caudal lure, caudal meaning tail, and it's a group of scales on the end of the tail that usually is a different color to the rest of the snake. The rest of the snake will be really camouflaged in the leaf litter, and then you'll have this black or grey or yellow tip of the tail. And what they'll do is they'll wriggle it like a worm in front of their face, and then that will attract things like birds, mice, lizards, anything that would prey on a worm. Comes over close enough and bang, fastest striking snake in Australia, grabs the prey item. Now, when people came across death adders versus other snakes, death adders would just lie there in crypsis, which means cryptic behavior, so hidden. And they would just lie there because if they move, they're not a very fast snake at getting away or anything. They're designed to sit and wait.
Ironically, right? They can strike at like a 50th of a second, but they can't move very quickly.
Yes, they can't actually slither away very quickly. So they're designed to strike out and grab prey items. Whereas our other snakes, you take a brown snake, they're actually on the move. They're terrestrial foraging snakes where they'll actively forage for their prey. They have great eyesight. They see a rodent. They're on the scent trail, and they'll track that rodent down and kill it and eat it.
I think you showed that in one of your videos, right? You had the snake, for some reason, it had no idea that you were right above it and you were filming it, and it was like looking around, putting its head in crevices between pieces of mud and everything, right? Looking for prey. Yeah,
that is in one of my videos where that was actually a piece of footage supplied to me by my friend Seren. He was on a field trip and he saw a dugite actually, or him and 8 of his classmates saw a dugite. They all stood around it, at a safe distance and just videoed it. and this snake was like digging, trying to forage for whatever it was after, probably in that sandy scenario, probably lizards or something like that. But it's an active foraging snake. So when people came across active foraging snakes, the snake would either dart off or it might become defensive if it was cornered or something like that.
So it was crazy to see it actually doing those behaviors, right? You're just like, wait, it's just ignoring us or it doesn't know we're here and it's just going about its business.
Yeah, that particular snake was just on the scent trail, something hard. It was locked onto whatever it was smelling in the ground, and it was using its face to actually dig the soft sand away and get into these little holes, maybe where a lizard was burrowed under the sand or something like that. So it was in active foraging mode, whereas you've got death adders who will lie there still. So when people came across a death adder, they could get as close as they wanted to it, and they thought the animal was deaf. They're like, oh, it can't hear us coming. All these other snakes can hear us coming, and they take off.
Yeah.
Death adder will stay there dead still because it's trying to rely on cryptic behavior and be as still as possible and as hidden as possible. So they thought the snake was deaf, and then they called it the deaf adder. Obviously, over the years, that didn't sound cool enough, and it was, discovered that these snakes are deadly. They do have dangerously venomous venom. So then the name was somehow got dramatized to death adder. Now, in today's context, when people hear death adder, isn't that the scariest sounding snake alive?
It's not an adder that I want to meet in a dark alley.
No, that's it. Like, you put death in an animal's name, people are going to think it's a lot more deadly or a lot more dangerous than it really is. And I say in many ways, death adders are a lot less dangerous to be around because you can literally walk right up to them and they're not going to do anything to you.
So you would have to literally pick them up, and that's when they would be like, whoa, okay.
Well, a highly defensive individual, maybe getting back to what I was saying about temperaments, a defensive individual, if you stood right next to it, it might strike out and bite in defense because it's scared that you're going to harm it. Whereas generally what they're going to do is just lie dead still and wait for you to leave it alone. Therein lies a small risk where some people can step on them unknowingly. And I've actually been photographing another snake species before on a gorge wall, just on a rock wall. And it was just a python. It slithered off the wall and went to make a run for it. And I've grabbed it by the tail and pulled it back, uncovering a death adder only a meter from where I was standing to photograph. And so I was
like, wait your turn.
I was so happy. I totally forgot about the common Stimson's python and let it go, let it slither off. And I was like, wow, you just uncovered this amazing death adder, which I was looking for. And I had to settle for the python. But to put that into context is I was there for a good half an hour just stepping around, and I could have stood on it.
And it stayed there.
And it stayed there for, the half an hour that I was near it. It stayed there dead still in ambush.
Yeah.
Potentially could see me the whole time. But then again, it was nighttime. I had a head torch on.
Are they the hardest ones that you've had to try and track down because of crypsis, the lack of running away when you get close? Because I imagine that almost the easiest snake to find is the one that moves the most, right? Whether it's because it's hunting or because you drive across on a road and you see it go by or you scare it away. It's like, all right, there it is, boom. But if it's just sitting there quietly and it camouflages in perfectly with the leaf litter or the sand, you're kind of like, this is a needle in a haystack.
Correct. Death adders are one of the hardest snakes to come across, but at night time they do move around. So during the day they'll either be sheltering or they'll be in ambush.
Yep.
At night time, that's when they use the cover of darkness to actually move to different shelter sites. So I have come across them active at night, and I've only ever come across two that were lying. One was basking beside a rock about 8 o'clock in the morning, and it actually wasn't camouflaged. And the other one I found, I dragged the other snake over the top of it, and it uncovered it from the leaf litter, that was
like, you must have been thinking, like, don't give away my position. Don't do it.
Nah, he would have been sitting there going, oh, this guy doesn't notice me. But yeah.
Can you use their tracks as well? Like, I imagine at night and during the day, you'd be able to see in some of these sandy places in particular, certain tracks that would allow you to find the animal and track them down, right?
You'd think so, but It never happens. You see the
Really?
tracks, but those tracks can be, if it's not windy, those tracks could have been made from the night before or the day before or maybe 3 days before. So just because you see some tracks going into a bush doesn't mean the snake's going to be there, unfortunately. But
Far out. Well, Ross, man, I've kept you a long time. Thank you so much, though. It was a great convo. Where can people find out more about you and what you do? And more importantly, this fundraising calendar for 2020, 2021.
Yeah, 2021.
It's for both, right? Is it starting the end of 2020, December, and then going into the next year? Or
no, what I do is because calendars need to be sold, a good 4 months before they actually come out. So the calendar's actually for next year.
Yeah,
but
okay.
If I started selling it as of January next year, people would be losing their months, because I'm trying to sell it during the time that it's
I'm just
active.
realizing how dumb that question was on my behalf.
No, that's right. That's right.
How can people find out about your calendar?
That's right. So please head to rmrphotography.com.au. That's where my online shop is. It's also where I've published all of my snake awareness information. So I've got my doco on there. And I've also got about 20 questions in sort of frequently asked question mode. So, what are the deadliest snakes in Australia, or are snakes dangerous? That sort of question answer format. So people can check out my photography there. They can watch the doco there, and they can also find out everything they need to know about Australian snakes. Also things they can do around the home to keep their pets safe. Other than that, if you want to follow me on social media, I'm just Ross McGibbon Reptile Photography on Facebook, Ross McGibbon Photography on Instagram, and then Ross McGibbon Reptile Photography on YouTube as well.
Awesome work, man. Well, thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to number 3.
Thanks, Pete.
All right, guys. Thanks again, Ross. It was an absolute pleasure chatting to you, mate, and I'm looking forward to number 3. Guys, don't forget that Ross is running a competition for his fundraising calendar. You could win one of these beautiful calendars full of photos that he's taken over his career or journey, taking photos of Australia's most venomous snakes, as well as some of the more dangerous lizards, larger lizards. Anyway, if you want to enter that competition, all you need to do is go down to the description, click the link if you're watching the video, or go to the podcast page where this podcast is up on my website. And again, click the link and follow the instructions to enter. Thanks again, Ross, and good luck to you guys entering the comp. See ya.